During the Cold War, Europe's air defense fighters were the first line of defense against possible Soviet aggression. NATO, in its early days, had one vital raison d'etre: to counter the forcible conversion of Western Europe to communism by the might of the USSR. The Cold War threat to Western Europe from the Soviet Union was massive and widespread. Any Warsaw Pact ground strike would have been preceded by a massive air assault. It was the task of the NATO fighters to see that this did not succeed. The Cold War was a truly exciting period in the development of interceptors. It saw a massive jump in their capability, not just in outright performance, but also in weapons, radar and tactics. In the space of just 35 years, NATO's interceptors went from subsonic gun-armed jets like the Meteor to Mach 2 radar and missile-equipped fighters like the Mirage 3 to the latest generation of superfighters such as the F-16, the most numerous NATO fighter. And in the supreme irony, NATO air forces have begun to operate alongside their former foes. The collapse of the Soviet Union has brought about the end of the Cold War and a new period of cooperation in Europe. NATO is currently looking forward to welcoming into its alliance new air forces of the former Warsaw Pact. These fly the very MiG fighters that NATO was once asked to destroy. Throughout the Cold War, the task of defending the European alliance was not an easy one. The region's geography presented a wide variety of problems when it came to air defense. The Cold War was a period of high tension between two massive power blocks. Throughout this period, the pace of NATO's fighter development was matched and frequently surpassed by that of the Warsaw Pact. Soviet aircraft were generally underestimated by Western analysts, but this was often unfounded. During the Korean War, in the early 1950s, American superiority over the Soviet MiG-15 fighter was thanks largely due to better pilot training and tactics. In many respects, the MiG was superior to the American F-86 Sabre. And NATO's qualitative advantage was easily negated by the Warsaw Pact's overwhelming superiority in numbers. NATO was threatened by thousands of long-range bombers and tactical fighter bombers. Their missions range from close support of ground forces to long-range nuclear strike against targets as far away as Scotland and Spain. Standardization of military equipment gave another advantage to the Warsaw Pact. Operating the same types of MiG and Sukhoi combat aircraft not only lowered cost, but also increased efficiency. In the event of mobilization for war, a squadron of fighters could have flown from Siberia to East Germany without notice and be met on arrival by trained ground crews who could refuel and rearm the aircraft for combat in minutes. In the aftermath of World War II, Western air forces largely flew piston-engined fighters. And when these nations came to replacing their late-model Spitfires and Tempests, Britain was well placed to take them into the jet age with two designs, the Meteor and the Vampire. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization came into being in April 1949, and fighter power was dominated initially by the Royal Air Force.
Operations.
Entering service in 1944, the Gloucester Meteor was the Royal Air Force's first operational jet fighter. After World War II, it went on to equip many air defense fighter squadrons in the British Isles and in Germany. Throughout the late 1940s, much of the air defense of Western Europe was entrusted to this straight-winged, twin-engined jet. The single-seat Interceptor was also joined by a two-seat night fighter version to provide all-weather defense. The Meteor also gave the first experience of jet fighters to the air forces of Belgium, Denmark and the Netherlands. The twin-boom Vampire entered service with the RAF in 1946. In Europe, it was every bit as successful as its bigger British rival. The Vampire served initially as a fighter, but later became an excellent fighter bomber. But Britain's early lead in fighter design was soon overtaken by the USA and the USSR. Although both the Meteor and Vampire continued to serve well into the 1950s, they'd been outclassed by swept-wing jets with near supersonic performance. The classic F-86 Sabre was one of the first swept-wing jet fighters to enter service. Tested in combat over Korea, where it overwhelmed the Soviet MiG-15, the Sabre became Europe's main air defense fighter in the 1950s. The North American members of the Atlantic Alliance contributed immensely to the defense of Europe throughout the Cold War. American-built Sabres first came to Europe with the US Air Force fighter wings, and these were soon joined by 12 squadrons of Sabres built under license in Canada. Other NATO users included Greece, Italy, Norway, Turkey, and Germany. The Sabre served as Portugal's first line of air defense well into the 1960s. Britain became a major operator, pending delivery of its own delayed fighter designs. The most famous of these was the Hawker Hunter, which became the classic British Interceptor in the 1950s. One of the most elegant aircraft ever built, it was sold widely. NATO air forces wasted no time in choosing this excellent fighter, and it was soon in service with Belgium, Denmark and the Netherlands. France's classic fighter of the 1950s was the Mystère 4A. This fast and agile single-seater formed the basis of the Super Mystère, which became Europe's first operational supersonic fighter. America dominated the early supersonic years with the F-100 Super Sabre. But the pace of fighter development was relentless. Even as the first supersonic jets were entering service, NATO nations were developing a fighter capable of Mach 2. In 1961, the Armée de l'Air had the distinction of becoming the first service in Western Europe with an operational Mach 2 fighter, the Mirage 3. This versatile fighter heralded a new generation of interceptors equipped with sophisticated fire control radar and armed not just with guns, but also with short and medium-range air-to-air missiles. The Mirage was widely exported and served into the 1990s. Although the Mirage 3 family would be France's most successful aviation export, these sales were mostly gained outside Europe. Instead, the USA dominated the scene with the Lockheed Starfighter. Nicknamed the missile with a man in it, this was arguably the first Eurofighter. During the 1960s, almost 2,000 were built for 9 NATO air forces: Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Turkey, and Germany. These versatile machines served not only as interceptors, but were also tasked with ground attack, nuclear strike, and reconnaissance. Belgium was a typical operator with 113 of these hot ships, most of which were built under license. Britain also entered the Mach 2 club in the early 1960s with the English Electric Lightning. The single-seater was used for the air defense of the British Isles, a difficult role to which it was arguably ill-suited. It was also only lightly armed and short-ranged. But the Lightning had performance in abundance. In its 3 decades of service, the Lightning's staggering climb rate and speed were not bettered until the arrival of the superfighters of the 1980s. Defense of the British Isles is a demanding mission. and from the mid-1970s, a new and more capable interceptor, the F-4 Phantom, began to supplant the Lightning. Originally developed as a carrier jet, the American Phantom is one of the greatest aircraft of all time. It was tested in combat with great success against Soviet-built fighters in Vietnam and in the Middle East. In Europe, the Phantom became the primary air defense weapon of Britain and West Germany. It was also widely used as an interceptor and reconnaissance aircraft by the US Air Force in Europe. This Phantom of number 56 Squadron, the Firebirds, is seen on an actual mission to intercept an unknown Soviet intruder. Fully armed with 8 live Sidewinder and Sparrow missiles, the F-4 is being vectored to its trade by a Shackleton airborne early warning aircraft. In RAF service, the F-4 was tasked with a variety of air defense missions, from battlefield air superiority over Germany to long-range over-ocean interception from bases on the eastern coast of the British Isles. Although its performance was not quite as blistering as the Lightning, the Phantom did offer critical advantages as an interceptor in several key areas, notably with its 2-crew cockpit to share the high workload, efficient Spey turbofan engines for long-range endurance, and heavy missile load for better combat persistence. In this case, the intruder is a Badger C bomber. Large underwing pylons allow it to carry 2 massive anti-ship missiles. The Phantom shepherds the Soviet aircraft away from the British Isles before it enters UK airspace. By the mid-1970s, the Mirage 3 began to be superseded in the interceptor role by the Mirage F1. The Armée de l'Air bought 250 F1s, equipping a total of 9 air defense squadrons. Mirage F1s were also sold to Greece and Spain. Protecting NATO's central southern flank is the responsibility of the Italian Air Force. Italy is the last major European operator of the Starfighter and has built nearly 300 under license.
Papa, Charlie 2 positivo. Quercia, Gruppo Alfa 1403.
4 e 03 da Quercia, forte e chiaro, ispettore 360.
Confermiamo 360.
Developed specifically for Italy, the F-104S model was the last and ultimate expression of Lockheed's manned missile. It's the only Starfighter version capable of carrying the Sparrow medium-range missile. By the 1980s, the Starfighter's intercept capability in key areas was deficient. Rather than buying expensive newer superfighters, Italy chose to upgrade nearly 150 of her F-104s under the ASA, or Armament System Modernization Program. This adds improved radar and allows the Starfighter to fire the ASPEED medium-range missile. These greatly increase the F-104's ability to detect and shoot down targets at low level, as well as its air-to-ground capability. West Germany became the place in Europe for Phantoms during the Cold War. Aside from the Royal Air Force squadrons and US Air Force F-4 wings, the Luftwaffe was another large-scale operator of the big American 2-seat fighter. Like the Italian Starfighter, the F-4F has also been upgraded for continued service into the 21st century. In the 1960s, the Luftwaffe bought 175 Phantoms for air defense and ground attack. These equipped 2 fighter and 2 fighter-bomber wings. Beginning in the late 1980s, the Phantom was upgraded under the Kampfversteigerung KWS program. This is designed to improve its abilities as a long-range interceptor rather than a dogfighter. Like Sweden, another neutral country which rigorously guards her airspace is Switzerland. Like the Swedish Air Force, the Swiss Air Force regularly practices dispersed operations from stretches of motorway. By this time, the Soviet threat had improved dramatically with the introduction of new advanced Soviet fighters. This called for a new generation of NATO fighters to deal with the threat. Best of the new breed, which appeared in the late 1970s, the F-15 Eagle replaced the classic Phantom in USAF service. Replacing the Royal Air Force as the major air power in Europe, the USAF has contributed extensively to the air defense of NATO. The West's premier air superiority fighter, Eagle Interceptors, sat Zulu Interceptor alert with 2 wings at Bitburg in Germany and Soesterberg in the Netherlands, as well as a squadron at Keflavik in Iceland. Smaller but just as agile as the F-15 is the F-16 Fighting Falcon, which has become the most successful fighter in Europe. Aside from a major USAF presence with F-16 wings, which have been based in Germany, Spain and Italy, the F-16 is operated by no less than 6 NATO air forces. Europe's last great fighter competition had been won by the Americans with the Starfighter. 20 years later, when it came to replace the Lockheed fighter in 1975, the F-16 was selected by 4 NATO members in what became known as the sale of the century. The massive deal involved the sale of 553 F-16As to Denmark, Norway, Belgium and the Netherlands, with most of the aircraft being produced under license by SABCA in Belgium and Fokker in Holland. Further sales of the latest C model F-16s have also taken place to Turkey and Greece. Illustrating their ability to carry out night intercepts are these Dutch Fighting Falcons. These Belgian F-16s are conducting a Sidewinder missile firing exercise. Comparable with the F-16, the Dassault Mirage 2000 is currently France's standard interceptor. Returning to Dassault's traditional Delta wing, the Mirage 2000 entered service in 1985 as the Cold War was drawing to a close. Equipped with an advanced fly-by-wire control system, it's a match for the Russian MiG-29 Fulcrum. Throughout the 1980s, Canada maintained her air defense commitment to NATO with a wing of CF-18 Hornet multi-role fighters at Baden-Sollingen in West Germany. Spain, the most recent NATO member, bought 72 Hornets. These are dual-role with fighter and attack tasks. The majority of their missions, 60%, are air defense. The Hornet has also been bought by 2 neutral European air forces, Finland and Switzerland. Contrasting greatly with the highly agile fighters in use elsewhere, Britain's Tornado F-3 was designed to intercept Soviet bombers 1,000 kilometers out over the ocean. Although reasonably agile, it's no dogfighter. But its excellent radar and weapons fit, allied to a high economical cruise speed, make it superb in the task for which it was designed. 2 squadrons of RAF Tornado F Mark IIIs have also been sold recently to the Italian Air Force to supplement the upgraded Starfighters until the arrival of the Eurofighter 2000. At the very leading edge of air power throughout the Cold War, NATO fighter pilots regularly kept up their skills at air combat maneuvering by practicing against similar and dissimilar fighters. These are two actual practice air combats between Belgian F-16s and French Air Force Mirage 2000s. Since the beginning of the Cold War, in the last half of the 1940s, NATO interceptors have guarded Western Europe against possible attack by Warsaw Pact forces. The fighters themselves became faster, more complex and better performing. The pace of development was breathtaking. The time span from the earliest straight-winged and gun-armed jets immediately after World War II to missile-armed Mach 2 fighters was just a dozen years. But throughout this period, the Interceptors' task always remained the same. They had to remain alert 24 hours a day, ready to scramble at a moment's notice to intercept, identify, and if necessary, shoot down hostile intruders.